be that
Mhm.
as it may, let's dive into some of the things that you expect. What do you think if you're a CIO or if you're a tech company leader that you would expect this administration to kind of open the door to?
Yeah, I think just from a starting point, it's hard to ignore that the one big tech initiative that we did here in the last 4 years was around Biden's executive order on AI. He did really put his foot down and say that he wanted a variety of aspects, or at least his administration, put down some expected standards for AI safety, security, and governance, which required developers to start talking about sharing their safety test results, providing standards and tools, working with NIST to ensure that the AI systems are working correctly, and figuring out fraud and deception issues. And all of these were directional. Honestly, they never really got to the level of being specific rules, but they were at least directionally relevant to where he wanted AI to be going. And honestly, I think it's pretty obvious that one of the first things Trump is going to do is to erase that, not because he is against these standards, but simply because he has shown a record of trying to erase what the last administration did and put his name and his stamp on what he's doing. That's just his management perspective, and it's what we voted in.
So he's already announced he's going to repeal that. So I think there's that one we can safely say. But I think the big question is, well, then what? And
Mhm.
I think I know that we were talking before we got on air here that you thought, well, he may just replace it with something else. And I think there's certainly going to be a lot of pressure. There was bilateral support for some form of AI regulation. There's a general consensus that we need the government to play a role. However, he also has very vehement vocal support from Elon Musk, which, as we sort of know from his approach to governing, that he rewards that sort of loyalty. And Elon Musk has been pretty adamantly opposed to most of this sort of regulatory action. And so it will be very curious to see which way he lands. I mean, the general consensus from what I'm reading is that this will be a deceleration of AI regulations, and which is not saying much. And so far as to your point, we really don't have any real true regulations for the most
Mhm.
part in place. Um, so I think it's going to be a slower roll, and I think it will be interesting to see how that ultimately plays out. Which to me leads into the other sort of element of it, in that the thing that we've seen out of the FTC over the last 4 years through the Biden administration is a much stronger focus on antitrust actions, mostly targeting tech companies. And those are sort of interrelated because every major tech company, of course, is now tightly woven into the AI fabric. And so that is going to be a question mark, right? There's every indication is that the Trump administration is going to be much less vehement in their pursuit of antitrust actions, and will and if you combine those two together, less or at least slower AI regulation and less antitrust action, particularly affecting tech companies, is that good or is that bad? Honestly, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it could take the handcuffs off a little bit, or it's not. I don't think anyone has handcuffs, but I think everyone right now is kind of doing this, right? They're looking to try to figure out which way the winds are blowing, and if that pressure comes off, then potentially we see an acceleration of innovation where people are moving more quickly, but that could also introduce some greater risks depending on where things go. So I think, kind of where I started. I think a lot we don't know, but I think it's those are two fairly safe bets in my mind of the most impactful things we're going to see for tech.
Yeah, it's been no secret that the Federal Trade Commission, with their chairwoman Lena Khan, over the past few years, has been antitrust and going after big tech. So, if nothing else, honestly, all of big tech, even big tech on the left, like the Reed Hastings of the world, are honestly kind of glad to see this loosening up of tech standards, because big tech has always been worried about trying to figure out, when are we as Microsoft going to have too much market share, or we as Google going to get too much market share that the Federal Trade Commission is going to start going after us. Obviously, Trump is going to bring in a more trade friendly and commerce friendly set of people across trade and business commissions. That part should
Well,
be safe.
in
Mhm.
theory, I mean, so let's not forget a huge part of his plank was this. I'll expose my own personal bias. Crazy talk about these ridiculous tariffs, and I'm not opposed to tariffs overall, but he was talking in some cases like 50% tariffs,
Right.
and he has been fairly unclear or unspecific on exactly where those would be applied. But this could have a very negative impact. I mean, obviously from a broad economic perspective, but specific to tech, is if these tariffs are hitting electronics, right? So one of the major issues we have right now around all of this that we're talking about is the ability to build data centers. We've got the power issues, which is also affected by all these sort of regulatory concerns. In that case, probably positively, but could this have a significant impact on cost if the raw cost of all of this equipment that is being imported in, because that's almost all imported, to be built, to be assembled in data centers here in the US, is that going to have a detrimental impact on IT operating costs because that's going to cause everything to skyrocket?